That's right. Our next guest is an Ottawa native. He played at Providence College, was a Canadian Olympian, and he holds the Flyers all-time record for games played among defensemen. He spent more than a decade as the team's analyst on radio and television, and he's now an author and works and helps people recover from their own addictions. He wrote Road to Redemption, Chris Therien's story, and the DFO Rundown is pleased to welcome Chris Therien to the pod. Chris, how you doing?
Doing great, guys. Great to be here with you early in this Monday morning, and appreciate that intro, Frank. It's been a lot of years. Yep. I know me and you would cross paths many moons ago, and when you were just starting out, kind of. So it's kind of cool how things come full circle, and I'm joining the podcast today. Awesome stuff.
Yeah, no, really glad to talk to you. And Chris, honestly, I've known you for a long time. We've actually never really dove into this. Even working alongside you for a long time, didn't have really any idea, what was going on or what you were going through. And, just wanted to dive in, tell us a bit of your story. What really stood out to me reading your book, you had been through obviously some challenges, but, the time that you really knew that you needed help and that this was it once and for all, you're packing your bag, you find a water bottle in your shoe, and fill us in on what happened next.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of like the end. And, it's so funny because I think anybody that goes through an alcoholic journey and comes out the other side and has, faith again in the system and belief again in the things that matter, that ended up being kind of like the exclamation point, the water bottle, but it was probably hidden years before, just something you throw in your closet. And it's funny because most alcoholics will tell you they hide their alcohol. I don't know why, but they do. And so that kind of, like, as I said, was an exclamation point, but the most of the damage to me had been done prior to that. Like my last year, the lockout year in 2004 is when I started to notice everything started to go spiral downhill for me. And I had to come back and play another year, which I probably shouldn't have. But, that's a competitiveness and you want to get back doing what you're doing. But it was, to say that I had a battle of my life, it was no question the battle of my life. And there's a lot of good, there's a lot of negativity that comes with addiction. But there's a lot of what the book ended up being, and you touched in the title with redemption, is the fact that you can redeem yourself. You can go through things and issues in life, and you can be a detriment to your own self and people around you. But if it's something else that's causing it, and mine was alcohol, you have an opportunity to fix that. And so my message is about hope. There's legions and legions of people struggling with alcohol and drug addiction. Now mental health has crept in since the pandemic. I mean, it's trauma. There's so many different levels and layers of it, guys. But for me, to have overcome it and then to have seen the successes my kids have had, not having to deal with that type of things because they were younger when I stopped and they never had to deal in their early adolescence or any of their teen years with it. I've stopped a long time. So for me, it's been nothing but rewards that I've reaped for my family, especially my kids. And that decision for me, when I look back at it, was a no-brainer. Now what I do is I spend my days trying to help people get it, whether it's get into treatment, destigmatizing the disease of alcoholism and drug use is so important to continue that mission, but to let people know that there is hope. Life doesn't end. We do recover, and you can go on and have an absolutely meaningful and fulfilled life beyond your wildest dreams. And that's where I'm at right now. But to be able to do that for me where I'm at now and have the time outside of hockey, which was really occupied a lot of it at one time, this is now the path that, I believe God's put me on. And I'm doing the kind of work because that I have to do because I don't forget the pain that I was once in, and I know how others are feeling as well.
I wonder, Chris, when did you first realize there might be a problem? Like, when did you go from just casual beers with the boys, being part of a team in the NHL and as a pro hockey player, to then it being something more than that? And how do you think this impacted your game at all? Like what were some different things that you went through as you were playing to just try and hang on?
I tell people this, and I think most guys, like, you can't, when you have Bob Clark's your manager, you have to show up most nights to play or you're not going to be around very long because he had a competitive stick. So as a hockey player for, I would say more than a decade, I was a focused, determined hockey player. But in 2004, during the lockout, we had an optional skate, I think one of the guys put it together because we're just trying to stay in shape in case the league rebooted again. And I remember coming out at 10:30 in the morning and I had the worst shakes I'd ever had. So going through that physical withdrawal because I remember the night, actually the day, because it was the night before. I remember sitting with a few friends. We were outside I believe it was an October night. And it was the game the Yankees, I think, had beaten Boston like 21-2 to take a 3-0 lead in the series, and where the epic collapse had happened. So I remember that next day having to leave the ice, and I remember going home, and it was like 11:30. I'm like, I don't know what's wrong, but I remember pouring a vodka, and all those withdrawals went. And that's kind of I think that's what happens with a person that's struggling with alcohol, is you end up becoming the dog chasing its tail every single day. And it was that morning in 2004 that I realized, man, I got a real problem here. And I just didn't know, and I didn't have the strength or the wherewithal to go and ask for help, because you don't really want to believe you yourself have a problem. But even to me, when I looked in the mirror, I pretty much knew right away. I just didn't have a way out of it. And that's very much part of what I do now, is to give people that hope, like to look for that way out. Because I remember I'm thinking like, God, I don't know what to do here. I have a real problem, and it was hurting me as much as it was anybody else. And so that's the part that that to me, where I had a strong recognition, Frank, that was the day that for me said, yeah, I have a problem. And until I decide I got to make a change, it's going to continue.
So Chris, then that's when you found out you had a problem. But so did you play a lot of your career where you were drinking fairly regularly?
No, I would say that was really, I was a drinker. I was a partier. I was, the guy that, like, big Saturday win, I'd go out, but it would happen one night and then we'd stop for a few days. I think the culture of sport kind of brings it upon, when you're playing, especially in hockey. But I didn't have a career I was actually early in my career very focused. I wasn't even much of a drinker when I came in. And I think as I progressed through the league, it picked up more. Whether it became the pressure, more maybe a relaxation period where you're part of the league and you've been in there for a while. But that was not it. Yeah, I had my moments, but it never to that point that I did my last year. My last year was an absolute mess. And it's something that probably is the most embarrassing part of my own hockey career, but that's the part that also, that had to happen in a journey to recovery. So, but no, early in my career, I was a partier. Probably someone said maybe he parties a little bit too hard. But when it came time to play in the games, I was ready to go and I was prepared, and that was what my focus was.
So in that final year, when it was the worst for you, did your teammates know? Do you feel that, did other people know, or did you do a good job of concealing it?
Both. I think couple of the older guys knew. I mean, we had a lot of older veteran guys at the time that had been through the ringer. Just in terms of their careers, were kind of winding down. And I think the next year, a ton of guys retired. But yeah, my last year, Keith Primo recognized it. I was always saying I never really blamed anybody for it. To me, it was always my own addiction. It was my own fault. But, and I've talked about this a little bit, especially at length, because it seems to be the questions that come out afterwards about the book is, what could the team or the league have done anything differently? And, if a player doesn't want to do anything, he's going to hide it, right? Unless he gets into some legal trouble. And I think that's the part. Like, if you go to somebody and you admit a weakness, and I mean, when you're an alcohol and you're playing on a team and you're playing games, it's kind of a hard thing to go and share with somebody. And I think there's like, it doesn't matter how old you are or what it is. You're a human being and you have feelings. And I think, and I honestly, God, I believe that the real reason people don't get help earlier is they just want to keep going on the path. They have a career. They're trying to play games. And it's embarrassing, I think, in themselves. And that's where I come back to the stigma of it, is to be able to shed that stigma and be able to go out and have the capacity to ask for help if you're in a problem. Tons of people have problems with drugs and alcohol, but it's a matter of how they're going to resolve it and how they want to resolve that.
And one more, Chris. I've read lots about trauma, and trauma can really impact people in different ways. You lost your sister in 2006. How much did that play a role, if any?
Yeah, nothing. I was already a full-blown alcoholic, and she was very much my best friend, and I would lean on her. We talked even the year that she passed. She had a sudden cardiac death. Something you can never really prepare for. And we talked before, how much she wanted me to clean up and get sober, especially for my kids and stuff. So, from that standpoint, but it's funny. I mean, I that whole story, I mean, you couldn't have made it up. I mean, to make someone's day even worse. Here I was in the midst of my alcoholism. I'd called the NHL, and then I get a call from people at home in Canada that something's happened to your sister. So I had to call the league back and say, hold on, I need to pause. and because something's happened at home with my sister, and then she ended up passing away, and then 2 weeks later I was in rehab. That last, I got sober and stayed sober for a couple of years, but I don't think a lot of that trauma, there was trauma afterwards that I don't think I was able to deal with right away. And that's how you have a relapse and you get back at it. And that relapse, though, was the part, like, I never got back to the levels I was before. And it was in that final time, 2011, that I think I finally forgave myself, and I finally decided it was time to move on. Like, enough's enough. I was 39 years old then. It's kind of my little my check mark, because I can now look at people say I've never drank in my 40s. I've never drank in my 40s. So I consider myself pretty young still to have had quit or stopped drinking, because some people don't do it till they're older. Some people do it younger. But the best part for me is I was able to do it, and I changed the lives of my kids. And that really, to me, is what the difference is in the way I view my history. I guess I partied pretty early in life, and it stopped early. But I was able to come out the other side. And that's a sense of pride for me when I see my kids and the successes that they have because of that.
It was actually a really poignant moment in the book, Chris. You had mentioned that, you reached out to the NHL and the PA for help. And then this incident happened with your sister, and she ends up passing. And you said that the doctor from the PA, I think it was Dr. Brian Shaw, said, "Hey, don't stop drinking right now."
Yeah.
And you said that was something like telling someone who has a Ferrari that there's no speed limit. What was that like?
I almost mentioned that right before, Frank, that you're talking about. I just didn't want to drag Dr. Shaw. Well, again, that's the hard reminder that he said, listen, you're going to go into a fire pit that I'd never been in before, and he knew it, and I hadn't. Like, here I was, my sister was probably, she was in a coma from the cardiac event. She was probably not going to make it, and I had to go back and deal with that with my parents. She was my only sibling. And he said to me, like, don't go home and be a hero in front of people. You have to drink to survive. And he said, don't worry about what anyone thinks. Don't try not to walk around slosh. But I was at a maintenance at that point, and then to go through that 2-week ordeal was it's like going to hell and back, and then back to hell again. It was just awful, and without question, the worst 30 days of my life. And I sometimes wonder how I got through it, to be quite honest with you. It was rough.
But I think that's an important reminder that a doctor actually tells you to continue, because it's a reminder to me that it's a disease.
Yes.
It's actually a toxic dependence that it's stigmatized because people don't think of it that it is a disease.
That's exactly correct. And you're Frank, you said the words right there. It's 100%. It is, there's an illness that comes with it. And when you say that, and it's a fatal disease, it's no different than anything else. So we celebrate, and rightfully so, celebrate people that recover from other ailments, cancer, and other things that happen. And those are different type of things. This is, for me, when I look at the disease of alcoholism and drug use, you have a choice, right? Like, you have an opportunity to do it. People that are battling cancer don't necessarily have that option. They have to go in for chemo and radiation. But this is a fatal terminal disease also, if it's not addressed and not dealt with. And the only way for me that I could see a path forward was from abstinence. That's it. It's a one day at a time process, and that's what people have to get to. And yes, when I look back at that, I never realized at the time when Dr. Shaw had said that. He goes, I remember he said in that voice, just keep drinking, don't stop. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, that's unbelievable to hear that. But when I years later look, like, he's thinking to himself, this guy could literally have a seizure and die if he stops drinking. That's how serious it was.
When you look back on that, Chris, and I think for a lot of people listening right now, there are lots of people that have dealt with alcoholism, dealing with alcoholism. And you talked about, forgiving yourself in 2011, finally, because, you'd for not a better term, falling off the wagon, you'd had relapses a few times. How much of it is like when you, and I don't know if it's too personal or not, but when you look internally as to, why you turned to being dependent on alcohol, what was it that you felt like at that time? That were you worried about, life after hockey? What led you down that path when you weren't for your whole career an alcoholic and then kind of suddenly became one?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that I phased into that. There's no doubt. You don't just become one overnight. So there was a course of drinking that transpired. I think anybody, when you go and you examine the life of a pro athlete, a pro athlete that's played a long time in certain cities and scenarios, I think that there's a competition level to them. I think my journey towards this probably became, and I've talked about it, and even in the book, I said, I don't know what price I paid to have gotten as far as I'd gotten, but, I'd gone through things as a kid. I've been cut from teams, and my determination, my focus was to get to the NHL, to stick it up everybody's rear end. And that was my driving force. And I often wonder, at the end of the day, to get there, to stay there, to put the work in, game after game, physical, mental pain and anguish sometimes that comes with it. What was the cost of that? And so maybe it quite possibly could have been, how my end days ended up in the NHL. But it wasn't a long time. It was for me. It felt like an eternity. But in terms of my hockey playing days, it didn't integrate until the very end after that lockout year, where I think there was a lot of league issues that went on, to be quite honest with you. But my story really began, I think, for me at the end of it, is in a new turn, was that February 7th, 2011 is when the new life began, and I was able to get on the tracks again. So, but there's a lot of things. I think a lot of people deal with a lot of different things in life, and how those forecast and how they play out over time. I'm not really sure about that, but I do believe that there's absolutely a connection between the two to some degree.
You mentioned your sister before she passed. You and her had conversations about how, you wanted to get clean and sober for your family and ultimately for yourself. And, she was gone for 5 years when you finally have been sober since 2011. Usually, you have to do a lot of the work yourself, but you need somebody, they're pushing you, challenging you, supporting you. Who are those people that because I don't know, I don't think anybody can beat it by themselves. You do need, a good support system. Who is that for you?
You know what? When I went back into to the rooms of AA, which to me, and I tell people this all the time, if you're struggling, get a sponsor, go to Alcoholics Anonymous, because it will save your life. And you're going to find out that the people that are in there are all like you anyway. All people that drank and are trying to stay sober, get sober. I have a great friend, my sponsor, Rick. He's a few years younger than me, but we've really bonded. The Flyers, as I go back to certain alumni tournaments, there's a few guys there that are also, don't drink anymore. So I've been able to lean on them, and some of them have open stories, some of them don't. But there's been a lot of really good things. And then I look at my kids too, at the end of the day. And my kids were I always tell the story about in the movie Hoosiers, where the Dennis Hopper character walks into the gymnasium completely loaded and embarrassing his son. He yells at the ref, and Frank knows this, but my daughters two of them still play Division I basketball. All three went to the same school, not by design, to Loyola, Maryland, and one of them is out of school now, but two still play. But I promised myself, as they were younger, that would never be me. That would never be, and I can't tell you how easily that could have been me. That's the kind of thing that could have happened to someone like me, and I promised myself that I would never do that to those kids. And that's part of it for me, when I was able to see the benefits that they were able to shine, because they didn't have to deal with an alcoholic parent in the house. And I've read stories, and I knew what that did, and I knew what it was going to do. So they were my greatest inspiration. They still are to this day. I've had many people that have jumped in and that I've been able to rely on. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a program that you have to overcome daily. But to me, it goes back to that team thing that you mentioned as well. You need a team. You need a small village sometimes to be able just to lean on somebody. You can't hold this problem in yourself and hide it, because it will eat you from the inside out if you try to do it. I tried to do that. You can't do it. It's what alcohol does. It sucks the life out of you. And until you remove it, you're not going to get that life back.
Chris, you wrote this book with our good friend Wayne Fish, longtime Flyers beat writer. I was wondering if you felt like, in telling this story publicly for everyone to read, was it cathartic for you at all? Did it help you?
Yeah, it was also, I know what you meant. I felt like it was painful also, Frank. There's times I was putting the story out, and I went back, and it was like opening a wound in a lot of ways, and I went back, and I had to take that deep dive back into, my adolescence, getting cut from teams, dealing with the hockey part of life, the bullying part of life, then the a lot of the joys, going to Providence, my takeoff at Northwood, how things came together, getting an Olympic silver medal and then making the NHL. There's a lot of highs and lows in life, but there's certainly, I think there's, I'm not going to lie, there's times that I was doing this alone or voicing it in my recorder. And I got personally emotional just alone sometimes, thinking about people that had, traveled past with over the years, or a teammate that was inspirational to me or meant something to me. Luke Richardson's story, with his daughter, just kind of going back and what that episode had done. Like, it just, there's so many little things, like the travesties and tragedies that have happened, and also the joys. There's times where I was able to kind of lift myself up in writing this as well. But no question, Frank, there was a re-examination and a self-examination of me. And I have to do that every single day. But I know I'm trying to do the right things. I'm not perfect. Just because you stop drinking doesn't not necessarily make you perfect. But for me, it's certainly, I'm on the right path, doing the things that I want to do. And I'm able to remind myself every single day of how I once felt, what that pain was like, and then be able to transcend that to somebody else. And hopefully they're able to figure it out like I was.
So that's exactly why I wanted to have you on. One, Thanksgiving this week in the U.S. and you and a lot of other people we all have a lot to be thankful for. But two, the holidays can also be a really lonely time for people. And this can be a really difficult time coming up. For anyone that might be struggling, you mentioned Alcoholics Anonymous, but you do a lot of work in the recovery community now. What's the first step for someone to get help?
Well, I think the first step is complete honesty. First of all, what do you have? I mean, if people start to talk to you about it, and then you have to be honest. I mean, do you want to get help? I talk to people almost every single day struggling with addiction, whether or not they want to go to rehab. When I first got in this, and my career path changed from hockey to addiction help and recovery help, especially. I got involved in the aftercare. And this is one of the things too, Frank, that I've been telling, I've said in podcasts to Gary Bettman, and Bill Daly, the NHL in general. The programs they have to get people away for 30 days is amazing. What they do, and not a great job of, is taking care of the players, whether it's alumni or the player getting out for aftercare. And that was the part that I struggled with the most. When I went away, I went to Caron Recovery Center in Wernersville, Pennsylvania. It's one of the best treatment facilities in the world. They treated me to perfection for 30 days. But when I got out of there, I was on my own. So unless you're determined you're going to get yourself to AA, you're going to go meet all these new people, they need to do a far better job with aftercare to get these people in the proper IOPs, which is intensive outpatient, so that they can continue that 30 days when they're back on the street, passing the same liquor store they used to buy liquor from, the same drug dealer maybe that they used to pass on the street corner. And that's a harsh reality of addiction. So that's those are the biggest things for me that I needed to make sure my message gets out. I got involved in the aftercare market because that's where people need the most help, I think. I do still represent Caron Treatment Facility, where I went first time and got sober. So I'm trying to get people placed. I do tell people all the time, Frank, if you do need it, you can need to get a hold of me. You can get a hold of me on any of my social media platforms. And I do have an email. If we could post it after, it's called bundyrecovery@christherien.com. You can email me there 24/7, bundyrecovery@christherien.com. Myself or somebody will get a hold of you, and we'll spend a few minutes with you trying to diagnose where you're at and what the next steps are for you. I implore people, get help if you need it. If you need to take that 30 days to get away from whatever it is, do that also. But please don't discount the treatment that's needed when you get out of rehab. It's that important. It's more important, as a matter of fact, than the actual 30-day, because your life depends on it every day. And and sometimes driving from your home to a Wawa can be a regular task without having to pass those liquor stores on the way. So that's why I'm telling people, just be honest with yourself about where you're at, and can work at it one day at a time. Will keep you sober for a long time if you can simplify it in those steps.
Chris, that's a really strong message. We always like to end with a rapid fire, where the only rule is you have to answer the question. All right, sure you won't have an issue with. What was your first impression of a young Frank Saravalli?
You know what? I'm going to tell him. I mean, Frank was gray when he was 23. I think he told me that. So I said, man, this guy is pretty distinguished writer and, carrying the message of hockey. Frank was a great guy. We'd known people in the city together when, I was a little older than Frank. he was a little younger, and we kind of, crossed the generations between the two. And I always thought he was a pretty stand-up guy, and somebody that, when I came out of hockey, we got along really well right out of the gate.
You have really immersed yourself in wanting to help others. There's lots of recovering alcoholics or who, they have time and they really only focus on themselves. Why are you so passionate to want to make sure that others get the help that you got?
Yeah, great question. Because I felt I've not forgotten the pain that I was in when I was struggling, and I know that the same people are out there because I talk to them all the time, and I want them to know that life doesn't end. You can recover, and you can go on and live a perfectly normal life, and that's a message of hope that I'm trying to spread.
When you played, Chris, what's your most memorable goal?
Memorable goal has to probably be, probably the first one. I would say the first one's always the best one. I remember, actually, you know what? I'm going to kind of throw my old broadcast partner under the bus, Keith Jones. A puck got stripped of the blue line, and I jumped on it in Washington one night. And Jonesy literally jumped on my back, and I carried him down the ice, and I went top under the bar against Jim Carey. And Jonesy got traded from Washington to Colorado the next day. so I never have a problem reminding him of that.
Well, it worked out for him. I think he won a cup there in Colorado. So
he did not. But anyway,
No, he didn't.
He got traded again, I think, for Sean Podine.
Oh, that's right.
After that,
right.
Yeah, I'm not mistaken.
Who was the funniest teammate you had?
Oh, boy, it's a good one.
You had some good ones.
I've had a lot of really good teammates. I was probably up there myself, I would say. Some guys might have answered that. I think the tandem, like Luke Richardson was not the funniest guy, but he was a great provider of material. Me and Johnny Leclerc, he could have made a movie of the two of us, probably roommates for 10 years. Funny teammates, I play with a lot. Craig Berube was a great teammate. I mention him often. He wrote the foreword in the book. If you talk about Berube and how lighthearted he was, I remember we had a Halloween game one year, and he had the mustache with the glasses on in the penalty box that Lou Nolan, the PA announcer in Philly, had it. Chief sat there the whole 2 minutes with it on the penalty box. It was like a 1-1 game in the second. How do you not laugh at that, right? I'll loosen the bench up.
Toughest guy you fought?
I didn't have a lot of them, but I guess Jeff Odgers. I had a couple of guys that had pretty significant fights. Jeff Odgers would have been the toughest one. Chris King. Odgers is one of those farm tough guys, but man, I saw some of the greatest fights in the history of hockey when I was here in Philadelphia, and the reaction from the Philadelphia fans, especially in the Spectrum. My first year was just unbelievable, having guys like Dave Brown around, and it kind of got the feeling from what the Broad Street Bullies and what this city embraced.
Dave Brown might have been one of the most feared guys. I still remember him, and he was just kind of very calm, looked like a doctor. I remember the first time I met Dave. He had his glasses on, he looked
glasses,
doctor. Like it was, and then he would go on the ice and he would become an absolute assassin. Craig Berube was tough, but also which one of your teammates flipping of the switch surprised you the most?
Probably, you know what? Robbie DeMaio. You remember Rob DeMaio?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was there's a great story. We're coming back from Long Island one night. We didn't have any movies. This is the old VHS, like the early days. You put the movie in, and everyone on the bus is watching whatever they put in. So we have no movie one night. So we came back from in Uniondale. Frank would probably be able to tell you this too. There was always a bunch of people in the parking lot that would give you hockey cards or those mini sticks. They want to.
Yeah, I call them the Long Island mutants because they're all friggin' weirdos.
They're all over the place. So I guess somebody gave Robbie DeMaio a fight tape of him and Junior in the NHL. And so we're coming back, and someone says, "Hey guys, we don't have any movie to watch." And someone says, "Yeah, Robbie DeMaio's got his fight tape." So we put in his fight tape. This thing was an hour and a half, and he was knocking guys out and just crushing them like big-time fighters. And he was sitting there kind of smiling and laughing. I'm thinking to myself, man, this would be the wrong guy. If you got in a fight with Robbie DeMaio on the ice and you expect to just grab this little guy, forget about it. So, and it's funny, I ended up playing with him in Philly and in Dallas. as well. So he was my roommate in Dallas for a little while. But yeah, he was one of those sneaky tough guys. Mark Recchi was like that also. Fuse that long, but man, when it went off, get out of the way.
Mark Recchi. Oh,
Mark
DeMaia
Recchi.
Mark DeMaia was tough, smaller guy who was really tough.
Both guys, small fire plugs. Yep.
This many years later, Chris, what do you miss most about being an NHL player?
Well, the guys, right? Like the locker room, being part of that's the hard. Yeah, I think sometimes too, you talk about going through emotional changes in life. That was the hardest single part of not being part of the NHL. Like I love that more than anything, being around the guys, being a good locker room presence, going out and playing the game of hockey in the best men's league in the world. But that's the hard part too, guys. When you come out of that, you're alone. Like you've got 22 friends built in. You're the 23rd, and when you're done, you're done. You're no longer going in there at 9 o'clock in the morning and hanging out with them. So yeah, being able to play, being part of that locker room and being around your best buddies every single day. You have to change that thought process and still keep those relationships that you had, but it's not the same as it once was.
And lastly, Chris, for you, what was the most important step on your road to recovery?
Honesty. Being just totally honest with myself and continue doing it now. Like coming on here, just, I have to strip myself naked, regulate my emotions and my honesty to be able to help others and help myself every single day. So, rigorous. It's like people say, it's a program of rigorous honesty. And to me, I can't really do what I do unless I'm completely honest and humbled by what this addiction did to me, but also how I recovered from it.
Well, Chris, congratulations on over a decade of sobriety, and more importantly, congratulations on your willingness to want to help others. That's making a significant difference. And so, thanks for joining us on the Rundown.
Thank you so much, guys, and have a happy Thanksgiving, Frank, the American one. And I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, Chris, thanks a lot. Congratulations on the book as well. And haven't told you this, but I'm proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you, brother. Proud of you too. Thank you, guys. Have a great week.